Hello everybody. Tonight we're going to be working on the exercises at the end of Chapter 2. And right before I started the video, I launched Visual Studio and I got this screen and I thought, well, I can just go ahead and sign in or actually use it as a talking point. Now if you guys are like me and you downloaded the community version of Visual Studio, it is free, right? You don't have to actually pay for it or anything like that, but they do ask you to actually sign into the product. And the way that you sign into the Visual Studio product is by using any one of your Microsoft accounts. So if you guys are logging into your Windows machine using an email address, then you already have a login. If you do not have a Microsoft account, it's something that you want to consider having because there are a lot of services that Microsoft has that you can access by virtue of that login. Now, you don't have to create a Microsoft-specific account like a Live Mail or Hotmail or Outlook Mail account. You can actually use any email address to do it. But it does give you that capability, and it's really just kind of like a fair trade, right? They're keeping track of like what software you're using, what kind of stuff you're doing, in exchange for giving you this like $1,000 piece of software for free. I think it's a pretty fair trade. And then, the other one to consider too is if you guys play Xbox and you have like a Xbox account, that would work here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do a sign in. So I'm using my personal account that I use for all my Microsoft stuff, even though I do have a gateway one too. And let's see if I remember the challenging part. Hopefully that's the right one. We'll find out in a second. All right, so it seems to be the right one. So they're getting things ready. And this is actually a fresh install of Visual Studio 2017 here on my personal machine. I really have not done much work on it yet aside from what we did the other night in the ASP.NET class. So we'll give it a second here to just get everything queued up. All right, now that the product has fully launched, you'll notice up here in the upper right-hand corner that it indicates that I am signed in. All right, and if you're running Visual Studio and you see that you're not signed in, at some point that screen will come up and it will nag you to sign in and either create an account or use an existing account. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. It is possible actually here to add multiple accounts. So I do have one that operates through Gateway, but for a number of different reasons I opt to use my personal account. It's just a preference. All right, so now that we have the tool up and running, let's jump over to the book and look at the first set of instructions. It says if you haven't installed Visual Studio Express for web yet, okay, well, we already know that we're working on 2017. Here we go. All right, so we're going to be creating a new project, and we're going to follow these instructions as best we can. And we know that the project templates are different, but I think we're going to get to the point now where we're getting a little more comfortable with the differences. But we are going to be choosing a new project type. If anybody in the class here is running into an issue as we're working, just raise your hand. I'll pause the video, come and help you, and make sure that we're all on the same page. But pretty much after we create the application, we should be okay. All right, so back over to Visual Studio, and for now, I'm going to actually be moving my PDF over to the other screen. So I have a second screen here, and I'm going to be reading from there. On occasion, I'll pull it back over as I need to, but I'm hoping that I don't have to. All of you do have both access to the electronic version and the physical version of the book, so you can keep that at your side as you're working. All right, so I'm going to go up to the File menu here, folks, and then I'm going to choose to create a new project. Now, the book is asking you to choose Visual Basic as your template for the back-end language. You are not going to do that. Microsoft has really switched their whole paradigm over to C#. So whenever we get those screens, please choose C#. It's not that we're going to be coding in that language. I just want you to get into that practice. So you can see I'm on Visual C# for the language. and then we are going to move over to web. You're going to notice that under the regular web category, you will not see the application framework that you're looking for. You guys noticing that? Now, as I'm doing this, I did have somebody in class who's using the 2015 version, and if you're using that version or older, you need to be aware of the fact that when you come up here to choose the project template, instead of choosing project on the older versions, you will have the option for new website. Choose that instead, because that's where you will find the template. In 2017, they made the choice to get rid of that menu option. Not sure why, but that's just what they chose. All right, so if you're 2015 or older, choose new website. Version 2017, the one that I'm using currently, we're going to choose project. Then once again, Visual C#. Web, we're going to expand it, and then choose website. And then you should see the ASP.NET empty website. Now you notice that that doesn't match what the book says, right? So is this the right choice? Is this going to be the right selection here? How many of you have already done this? All right. Is this the right selection? Sure. It is. It actually is. Now, and see, this is the difficulty here, because we have these other project types, and they will give us different tools, right? One of the tips that we're going to have is that if they're telling us in the instructions to look for a certain thing and it's not there, or it might be named something different, we can jump into panic mode and freak out, or realize that maybe it's not the right template, or also maybe realize that maybe they changed things. And I'm going to tell you just from experience right off the bat, there's a good chance they probably just changed it. So I am going to select empty website. All right. It does want us to name things. So we're going to follow the conventions that they're using. And in step number 3, they say, set the name of your application to Contoso website. And guess what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to sideline us. And why I'm going to sideline us is we got to talk about file management here first, don't we? Where are you going to store this? Are you just going to save it in my documents folder? Are you guys noticing where the save location is? Maybe that's not actually a bad spot. I really don't know, but that's not where I would think of looking for it after I save it. I like to put all my work inside of my Google Drive. Now, I think I gave you enough of a lecture on that last week in terms of why that's a good idea. I like to run the memory resident version of Google Drive on my machine, so it runs down in my system tray. It's an installable piece of software. I create a folder for my web programming 2 class, and then what I usually do is I create a folder for whatever semester that I'm teaching. And if you guys were here last week, you know that I already did that, so that's why I'm deleting the one I just created. But I have one for 2018 spring, and that's where I want to put everything. That way, I can just go to that folder and find everything for this semester. So I'm going to change this location here. So I'm going to browse, go to my Google Drive, go to my Web 2, go to my semester folder, and I'm in the root, that's where I want to be, and I'm just going to select that folder, and then it'll automatically change that. Now, one thing that the author likes to do is to name the solution file using a different name. I'm going to tell you just as a matter of practice, I don't usually do that. He does that, so if you want to follow along with what he's doing, please do. And there's really a logic behind it. Now, if you guys don't know what a solution file is yet, a solution file is a pointer file. It just contains basically a list of resources for the project. So any files or folders or things that are included in your project, it points to them. So you can actually just go to that solution file at a later time, double click it, it opens up Visual Studio, brings all the project resources in. All right, so he's saying change the solution name. Yes, Brian, question? I think it's silly. Now the question is, why don't I use it? Because when I save the solution, it creates a file with an SLN extension. And since in my file system, my file extensions are turned on, and that's another thing I want to talk about, I just look for the SLN file, and I also recognize it by the icon. So let me go ahead and actually do the create on this, and I'll jump over to the folder and show you exactly that. He does want us to make sure in step number 6 to keep create directory for solution checked, and hopefully you guys are all there. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then I'm going to jump over to my file folders and show you what it just did. And this will be a repetitive process, so you'll get used to this. But I think it's helpful in understanding how this product builds out your folders so that you don't get lost navigating through them. All right, so you see it went ahead, it created the template for the project, and now I'm going to jump back over to my file folder here, and you can see that it created a separate folder here, and notice it calls it Contoso Website Solution. Now, I find that cumbersome personally, to answer that question, but it's a practice that some programmers use to make sure that there's a delineation between like where the actual files for the project are and where the solution is located. When you click that little box that says Create Directory for Solution, what it's really doing is it's creating a master folder, and then inside that folder, it's putting a separate folder that actually contains your folder structure. Okay? Which is not a bad practice. Now, most of the stuff that we will build, and even professionally, you'll usually have one set of folders you're working with. And you call that an application. But it's not unusual for an application when it gets complex, or when you're working with multiple developers, that you actually have multiple folder structures that are all part of the same solution. So really you would have a suite of applications working together under one solution file. So the reason they do this is as you're working towards like a team environment where you're building really robust applications, it becomes necessary to do this as a practice. So what they're trying to train you to do is to do that. Now you got to remember this book is designed for training people to pass a professional level certification, so they're teaching you professional approaches. Whether or not it's really necessary to go that route, I mean, it's a matter of opinion. I know for a fact that it's really not necessary. So why do I say that? That's exactly why, Brian. So hopefully that brings that into focus. Now, if I were to navigate into this folder, you'll see here the same folders that I'm seeing in my Solution Explorer. You see that? So that's kind of the correlation there. If I were to not select that box that said Create Directory for Solution, the solution file would be located inside this folder with the rest of the files. And if I know I'm only creating one set of folders, for me, I mean, from a practical standpoint, really, to me, it doesn't make sense to do that. But this is the way the author is pointing you, and that is the way professionals work when working on large projects. So that's why he does that. Joy?
Yeah, so I'm doing an older version of 2000, and it's giving me nothing close to what's up there. You gotta get that new website thing, and all I got is a web dot.
Okay, that might be perfectly normal. How many of you are not seeing a bin folder? Okay, you're also using 2015, right? Okay, that's actually perfectly normal. The bin folder is typically obscured from view. Do you want to know why? What's a bin folder for? What is bin? It is for executables. A bin folder stands for binaries. When you take a program and you compile it, in other words, you let the debugger run through and convert it from people code to machine code, it changes the file in a way that can only be read by the machine. And the executable files that are created get dumped into that folder. Now, I must have the option set here, and I'm not even sure if it's in the toolbar anymore. And you guys might be seeing, well, see, the bin folder is still there. So I'm really kind of confused as to why it's doing it that way, but I must have an option here somewhere that's hiding it. And you guys might have that as well. So, and frankly, I really don't want to dig in and find that right now. I want to get on track with the exercise. So don't worry about seeing that folder or not seeing it. But if you're getting a completely different set of resources, if you're seeing like 20 folders, then that's a problem, right? You got the wrong template. Okay. And for the older version, just seeing web.config and that other file, that's absolutely normal. And actually, thank you for bringing that up because it gets recorded into the video, and then people at home that might be using older versions will have the same question, and it might save me an email or two, or 5. All right. So for me, we are now complete with step number 7 on page 54. So I'm moving on to step 8. Now, step 8, this is kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about this process here. It says when the application is created, click Debug and select Start Debugging. Now, you guys are going to notice that right up here, it probably doesn't say debug. Does it? Did the 2015 version say debug? Okay. And that's because that's what they used to do in 2012. In the more modern version, what they're doing is they're realizing this is a website, and when we hit the debug button, which is the play button with the little green arrow, that initiates the web server and compiles the code that needs to be compiled and runs the application. All right. They're also indicating to you that there's a shortcut key that you can usually use. It's usually F5. And if you hover over that button, I'm trying to hover without bumping my mouse here, it will typically give you the shortcut key, but I'm noticing that it's not. But if you went to the debug menu and see where it says Start Debugging is F5. And if you've ever done any Visual Studio programming before, like in a traditional programming language, that's what you want to do because F5 triggers the debugger and the compiler. However, that's not what we're doing here. We're building a website. So you're going to get this little tip here that basically instead of hitting F5, you hit Shift F5, which just launches it into a browser and doesn't run the debugger. Does that make sense? So that's really the convention that we're following here. Now, if you want to try it, I mean, no harm done. Ours is already set in 2017 to automatically fire into the web mode. You'll notice that the wheel is spinning in the tab and it's throwing an error message. Why is it throwing an error message? Yeah, I haven't made anything yet. Of course it's going to say page not found or forbidden. Or actually, I'm surprised it doesn't say you're a complete idiot, right? Well, somewhat of an idiot. You're studying to be a professional idiot. All right. All right, so we got the error code there, and in step 9, they want us to either close the browser or come back in here and hit the stop button. And then they want us to go into the Shift F5 mode, which we already know what that's going to do, right? Should I try it with the keyboard shortcuts? Shift F5. I got to be in the right application though. And it's not even, for me, it's not even triggering. Okay, and actually, that's fascinating, actually. Older versions. So here we got another difference, folks. Shift F5 in the older versions. Looks like the new version they did what? Control F5. Okay, throw me a curveball again. All right. Still get the same error message, right? Why? Same reason. No web page to run. Okay. So that's one of the things that's a little uncomfortable in this book at times is they give you a step and it's true cause and error so you can see what the errors are. Make sure that you read what it's saying as you're working through that. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a page inside the Solution Explorer. So I'm on step number 10, page 54. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to jump to the root of the project. And the root of the project for us is where it says Contoso website, and there's a little planet indicating it's a website. All right, so right there, I'm going to actually right-click and choose Add. And then I'm going to just pause here for just a moment, because this is a little process that we're going to do repeatedly very often, and that is to add new components to our projects. And the way that Visual Studio is built, you can do a lot of things from a lot of different spots and get the same result. So for example, I can actually navigate up to the menus, find the add dialog from there, and do the same thing. But because this is context sensitive, it's relative to the location where I'm currently working. Now I want to add a web page. I don't want to just add it anywhere. I want it to go to the root of my folder structure. So that's why I'm right-clicking on the root of the website. I'm choosing add, and then I'm about to click on add new item, but what I want you to pay very careful attention to is what is in this list. So there's these divider lines in this dialog box where basically the stuff that is above that first divider line are like the standard system menu items, the standard thing that you would find up in the menus up on top. But what is below are things that are relative to the context in which you are right-clicking. So it's recognizing that we're in the root of the project, and it's actually kind of guessing, and it's saying, well, like, you might want a web form, or user control, or a JavaScript file, or a style sheet. So it just puts them right there for you, because it knows that those are the most common types of things that you're going to add. Now, the author does have a separate plan for us, and notice that what he wants us to add is an HTML file, but that doesn't appear on this list, does it? So we're going to actually choose Add New Item, and then it's going to bring up a dialog that should look similar to this or somewhat similar to this. Once again, whenever we're doing this, we're using Visual C# as the back-end development language. We're not really using it here. If you're in the .NET class, you will use that. But that's the template we want to stick with because we want to keep those consistent. You can see right at the very top of the list, it'll say HTML page. Now, another thing that you'll learn to discover over time is that search box in the top right is also pretty dynamic. So, like, if you have like a whole bunch of different templates here, and you're not seeing HTML, you can actually just start typing like this, and it should narrow it down. Now, it did narrow it down a little bit. Do you guys notice that? But you notice that it kept other stuff up there that's not exactly HTML, but I know that if I clicked on any one of these, it'll probably have HTML in the description over here. Okay, so that actually can be a very, very helpful tool. But notice how when I did that, it gave me both versions, Visual Basic and C#. So, I mean, usually the best approach is to know your development language, know the thing you're finding, but if you really have an extensive list of things, don't hesitate to use the search box. The neat thing about the search box is it will, depending on what category you've picked on the left, it will pick what's already installed, or if you have things that aren't installed, you can switch to the online section and it will find them online, and if not installed, we'll install them to your machine. So that gives you this implication that there are a whole lot of other things that you can add to Visual Studio, and yes, that's how Visual Studio is. It's a monster of a product with lots of available templates that people have built. Some by Microsoft, some by individuals, some are free, some cost money. So choose HTML page, and then let's name the page. And what do they want us to name it? This is kind of curious as I type it in. Default. Okay, what happened to that thing I learned in the first HTML class that told me it should be index? Right? Yeah, they just made this arbitrary choice that default would be what Microsoft uses. They've since kind of waffled on that a little bit, but as we're going to see, that it really becomes irrelevant within the project. Most web servers, if configured correctly, will automatically load default HTML just like they will index.html. All right, but Microsoft applications that are built using this tool, we also have this ability to actually take any page within a project, regardless of its name, and make it the home page, which is kind of an interesting feature. So all of a sudden, the naming conventions that we've learned are kind of being thrown out the window in a sense. But really, they're naming conventions for a different set of tools. So in a .NET environment, you most often see default as the home page. And if you're working with ASP.NET, the file extension will also change from HTML to ASPX. and all my ASP.NET students. Sounds like a repeat of Tuesday, right? Or this is Tuesday, I mean Friday. All right. Go ahead and click Add, folks. And then what it's going to do is it's going to build out a real simple little HTML page for us. That looks like this. And this is really the basic structure of any HTML page. And if you were smart as a Web 1 student, before you would build any page, you probably created a blank template like this, and you could just open it up and you wouldn't have to type all those commands in every time. But according to the rule set of HTML5, these components need to be present on every web page for it to be HTML5 compliant. Why do we have a doc type again? Right. It's like, hi browser, I'm declaring myself as being HTML5. Please execute my code based on the HTML5 rule set. Those are the rules I'm following. Please follow those rules as well. That's what it's basically doing. So as long as you follow the HTML5 conventions, everything should work as intended. If I screw this up and did something like this, all bets are off. So make sure that you follow those rules. Now, that's kind of the fun thing about working with a product like this, is it automatically creates this for you so that you don't have to worry about not following the rules. And as you're going to see, as we progress through this class, you're going to learn a lot of little shortcuts that you go, God, I wish I would have been using this when I learned HTML, because it would have saved me like hours of headaches. And folks, the whole point of these tools is that you do not make mistakes and that you can accelerate workflow, because professionals need to work quick to make money. Your employer's not going to want to sit around for a whole day while you create one single web page. They probably want you to create 20, right? And that's how you make the big money. And how do you do that? You use tools that accelerate your workflow, right? And this is definitely one of them. All right, so we're going to jump into the title element here, and they want us to type in this for a title: Contoso Limited homepage. That was step number 11. We're going to move on to the next step. And the next step, it says that we want to add a new folder. All right, so we're going to, once again, select the root of the project, right-click, choose Add, and then this time we're going to add a new folder from the dialog box. Just go ahead and click that. Once the folder is created, go ahead and title it Images. Notice, though, real carefully in the instructions, how they're naming it with a capital I. That's not what I was taught in Web 1. Well, welcome to Microsoft, folks. Their convention is capital letters to lead off file names and folder names, depending on the format that you're using. So we're following what they're doing. Okay. All right. Now they want us to right-click the folder we just created, and then we want to add an existing item. So I want to talk about that first. So here we are working within an interface, and we want to add an image, obviously, to this images folder. That's what's happening here. And they're pointing us to adding an existing item, and the thing is, oh my God, where is that existing item, right? Well, if you downloaded the source code for the book and dig through each chapter's folders, you will find those files. But you're like, where are those files? Well, let me show you. And see, I know, like if you're smiling, you've already gone through this process, right? So now I forget if I put it into the course shell itself or into the unit folder, or if I put it in resources, but it's either in one location or both. It is in resources. Yes, my web connection is being slow here tonight, folks. All right, Letters Unit 2, which we've already determined is not the location. Let's go to Resources. All right. And then you'll see right here that textbooks files that you can actually download and unzip the code, which I've already done. I already have those files on my machine. And you should do the same. And if you dig into those folders, what you guys are going to discover is that every folder's got a starting version for each exercise and a completed version. And sometimes those will be very handy. Okay? Sometimes. But I would always caution you that really you should manually go through and create everything as instructed in the book. Now, to kind of help a little bit with this, I also created a share on Google Drive, and I haven't checked it in a while, so I was a little pensive. But we are going to be adding a logo, right? And so what I did is I created this share out on Google Drive, and you can just come out here and just grab the file that you need. And most of the stuff that you're going to need for the whole book is right inside this share. So that's where you can find it. Okay. So I'm being preemptive here, and I'm trying to find what the name of the file is that we're bringing in. ContosoLogo.jpg. So it's this one, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and actually download this to my local machine. So I'm just going to right-click and download. And then once it's downloaded, I'm just going to cut it out of this folder, take it over to Google Drive, where I'm working on this. So in my Spring folder, in the Contoso website. Oh, no, it doesn't want to do it. We're not supposed to do it this way, right? No, we're not. Okay, so here I am racing ahead showing you how I would do it, but I'm trying to follow the book. So here we go. Let's follow the instructions now. Do what the book says. So right-click, add, existing item. Where is it right now? In my downloads folder. So I'm going to go to my downloads folder. And then one little handy trick, folks, if you're working inside of Windows, I don't know what file and folder views you guys run, but right now I'm in what they call details view. And the reason I usually opt for this view overall is because I can sort, right? So it shows the date modified, and if I just click on this up here, it should actually sort by download date. And of course, it's failing horribly here because what's it looking for? You see this down here? I'm actually going to switch to all files and then resort again. And there's a logo right at the top. So that's one of my favorite ways to sort my downloads folder is whatever came in last is at the top, kind of like email is, right? So it's really easy to find stuff. But I had to switch to all files here to find it. So there it is. I got to think about it from the standpoint of the existing item from the dialog of Visual Studio. It doesn't know what we're looking for. It made a guess, right? And you notice that JPEG was not one of them, so that's why I had to switch this. But there's the logo. I'm going to click Add, and then it'll drop it directly into the folder. Now, I'm actually going to delete this. Don't do that. You already have it there, leave it there. But I'm going to show you a different way to do that as well. If you know that you have something already sitting in a folder, so if I know that it's already in my downloads folder, right up at the top, the other option that I have, and you can see I'm bopping between screens here, is I can actually just drag and drop it right in. How do you like that? And in many ways, I think that's easier, especially if you have all your stuff up on screen at the same time. All right, now that we have the image in our images folder, now we're going to go ahead and add some HTML code. So we're on step 14, bottom of page 54. And inside the body section, we're going to add an image tag. It says, in the body element, add a comment. Oh, it says add a comment. Got to read that carefully, right? And so I'm going to follow this step. So this is a comment. You notice how Visual Studio is so polite to close the comment for me? I didn't even have a chance to do it. It's just a wonderful feature. It says add image with Contoso logo. Why don't we just add the image is my thinking, right? Okay, once again, trying to prepare you for professional work, sometimes you leave placeholders like that for other coders, saying, hey, I'm not the image guy, I'm the JavaScript guy. So don't forget to add the image here. That's kind of how people do. If you are not a person who comments a lot in your code, I might want to get you to start thinking about rethinking that. The reason for that, as I realize my microphone is for me, the reason for that is what I saw demonstrated this afternoon. You know, Tom was in here and I was helping him with an issue, and he was working on some code and it wasn't working, right? And what I saw that showed me that he's really developed as a developer is every version that he tried that didn't work, he commented out and left in his code, right? Because maybe it wasn't really that far off. So maybe you guys don't do those things. And sure, you can go back and delete them later if you want, but be verbose with your comments and how you name things. So.
If I'm stepping away from what I even put in there,
That's a smart move too. That's actually a technique I use also. Now they do want us to add a H1 element. So hey, we're actually writing HTML. Did you guys notice that? Let me actually just Control Z what I was just doing and type that in again because I'm typing it in manually, right? So bracket. Now notice the IntelliSense tool brings in a menu, and I can actually use my arrow keys and navigate down to H1. Or I can start typing it. It narrows down the list even more. There's my H1. Realizes that that's the right one. Now I can hit my tab key or my enter key to lock it in, or just finish typing it, either one. And then as I close it, notice that it puts in the closing tag for me. Now, is it implying that I'm not smart enough to do that myself? Yeah, it kind of is, really. But it's preventing a problem from happening, because one of the rules for HTML5 is what? Anything that's open must be closed. Yeah, you got to close all those tags. So it's helping you not make a mistake, folks. Welcome to Contoso Limited. And let me say something about Contoso. This is Microsoft's imaginary company that they use for a lot of their training. So if you guys ever take any high-level Microsoft training, it's always around this company called Contoso. Just so you know. Where is it coming from? I don't know what it stands for, but they use it for a lot of different things. All right, the next thing they want us to do in step number 16, top of page 55, is add another comment here. And this time, they want it to say add iframe here. That also will be discussed or added in a later lesson, but they're putting in the placeholder on purpose so that we have something to work with. All right, so after you do that, your code should look, hopefully, somewhat like this, and I hope it does. You guys also notice that if you're looking at the book, like I'm looking at it over here, and I'm intentionally kind of side-by-siding this stuff, do you notice that since the printing of this book, they have the doc type HTML, and notice the second line, the HTML tag, and then the little attribute they add, which is the XML namespace. Do you know why they had that in there? Because when the book was printed, HTML5 was not a standard. And in order to get it to adhere to the rule set, they would actually have to point to the file on the server that held the rule set. What rule set was it pointing to? HTML5? Interestingly, XHTML. So since that time, at the beginning of 2014, basically, HTML5 became the standard, and now we can omit that. Isn't that interesting? All right, so you don't have to add that code in. If your tool's pre-creating it for you, it's doing it for a reason, so go with what it pre-creates. All right, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the Solution Explorer. We're going to click on the default HTML page, and then we're going to do this right-click and do exactly that thing that I was talking about before, which is we can designate the default HTML page as the start page for the application. So I'm actually going to click that setting, and then somewhere in the background, actually more specifically inside web config, it adds an entry that says that this is the start page. So when somebody comes to the root of the application, go to this page. Simple enough. So that can be any page with any name. It doesn't matter. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start debugging. So what that means is hit the play button, and let's see what happens. Hopefully, that. Another thing that you should do, and you should get in the habit of doing this, okay, thank you, Adobe, not right now, is always do the right-click view source when you're working with high-level editors, just so that you can do a little bit of a comparison between what you created and what you're seeing. Now, of course, we're still writing static HTML, folks, so we should see here exactly what we created inside of Visual Studio. Those of you that are in my .NET class, which is most of you, either online or face-to-face, will start to notice when you're working with .NET and you're really building .NET applications where code runs server-side, what you see inside of Visual Studio is not what you see in the browser. That's not the case in this class. Here you will be able to see all the code. The only code that you won't be able to see is any code that runs server-side or is code that's bundled into some sort of an API. All right, so since we got that to work successfully, we should be good. Anybody not get it to work? Okay, that's a good sign. All right, we are on to exercise number 2 now. We're at the bottom of page 56, and I'm just going to keep plowing ahead here. So they want us to be working in the same project, right? Nod and smile. All right. And they would like us to add another HTML page. So I'm going to right-click on the root here. And you guys should know this process by now. So I can add new item. Can you guys notice at the very bottom of this context-sensitive list here? Do you see what's been added? Something I recently created. So I can go ahead and actually just click that to create it if I want. And over time, it's going to kind of learn your behaviors and start adding things to the bottom of that list relative to the location within the project where you currently are. And that happens dynamically. So if like you do a certain type of thing over and over again in certain types of folders or certain locations within a project, it learns it and offers that up as an option. I'm actually going to go ahead and click it. Why not? Notice all the dialogues went away, right? So what it's doing in the background is it's following the patterns I've already established, and they want us to name this. Notice the naming convention, capital M, main, content, and a capital C. Do I have to add .html? Actually, you don't. You can just leave it like that, or you can type it in, up to you. Either way will work. But there is the main content page added to the root of the website. All right. If you click on the main content page in the Solution Explorer, it will bring it into the code window. You can see the same thing we had before, basic HTML page. But they do want us to add a couple of things. So let's go ahead and add the title, which is, guess what? Main content. Very exciting. And then down here is the main content for the home page. All right. Now the next step, step number 3, top of page 57, he's trying to give us a new way to launch into the browser. And he says, to view this page, right-click in the middle of the source code. Okay, here I am. And what does it say? View in browser. So I don't even have to go over to the Solution Explorer. I don't have to do the laborious task of moving my mouse all the way to the top of the screen and clicking the play button. I can just Launch it right from here. And what am I going to launch? Well, let's find out. Let's hit the view in browser. I hope it's this page, right? And thank God it is. What would have happened if I hit the play button? Yeah, might actually went to the default page. You know, I'm going to tell you what, the only way to really find that out is let's try it, right? No harm done, no harm, no foul, right? So that's what happens when you hit the play button. It goes to the default page. Why? Because we did that little right click, set as start page. That's kind of cool, actually. All right, folks. So we are done with step number 3. Close the browser window, I guess number 4 as well. We're going to add another new HTML file, so go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to keep using the shortcut approach at this point. And this one should be called Human Resources. And there's that page. All right, and it says add the following text. Human resource content here. And maybe you want to put like HR up here or something like that. It didn't tell us to do that. I'm being brave and creating my own path here. Living large. All right. Once again, do a right-click view in browser to see if it built correctly. Looks good. Go ahead and close that tab. Then we're going to add another page. And you see how the process kind of starts to accelerate here? Who would have known that you'd be able to add pages so quickly to a project with so few clicks, right? So another HTML page, and this one's going to be expense, oops, no spaces, reports. Once again, go ahead, right-click, view in browser, make sure it loaded up okay. Wait, I didn't add any text to it, did I? Not the end of the world. Expense, report, content, here. I'm going to add a title just because I want to. Is that wrong? You know what? I'm not going to do it. Can I tell you why? Because we're going to see the difference in the browser when we get to that point, because we're real close to that. I'm going to leave that one blank, so just keep that in the back of your head. All right, I'm going to do a right-click view in browser. There it is. Notice what's in the tab now. Right? That's why you put stuff in the title tag, so you can control what goes into that tab. Do you notice, though, right now I have, 5 tabs open. I could probably get like 2 more in at full size, right? And then after I start to add a couple of tabs, then they start to shrink. And then as they shrink down, yes, I'm doing this on purpose, it really shows you that what you put in your title tags is that very first part of the text that's crucial. So you don't want to waste what's in that first part. So like, for example, if all of my pages started out with Contoso Limited, that would be okay up to a point unless I had 20 Contoso Limited tabs open and I wouldn't know which one to go to. But, there's other little techniques you can use as well. But that's always the thing I like to point out to people. Be really strategic about how you name those things, because they actually do matter to users when they're using a page. You don't think about it being important, but it actually is a pretty important thing. The other reason those titles are important is for SEO when you're doing search engine stuff. Search engines actually look for that. What's the title of the page? They're looking for human resources. Hey, the title of this one is human resources. Maybe that's the right page, right? So that's kind of the rationale there. All right, believe it or not, that's the end of exercise 2. We're now moving on to exercise 3. So we are at the top of page 58. And then, so I'm going to record the answer to this one. Okay, so I had a question that just popped up. Have you been saving this all along? I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but if I make a change to a document, watch really carefully at the tab right here where the current document's open. I'm just going to add a couple of dots. Okay, notice how the asterisk popped up. Oh yeah, it also shows that there's this hasn't been quite saved yet. The code hasn't been checked. That's the on-the-fly debugger, by the way. And I could go ahead and hit the save button and save that file, or even hit the save all and save all of them. But anytime that I do that right-click view in browser, what it does automatically, and this is true of any program that compiles in an IDE, saves the work first, otherwise it can't compile it and run it. So now when I go back to Visual Studio and take a look, you'll see that it is saved. So now I do see people that kind of, because of old habits, die hard, Control S or hit the icon and then do view in browser. That's fine, But I'm also going to show you that you can also trust the tool here and know that if you do a view in browser or hit that debug button, it is going to automatically save. That's kind of cool, right? Now, think about this in the grand scheme of things, right? How long does it take to do Control S? Half a second? If you do that 100 times a day, right, that's 50 seconds. That's a whole minute that could be added to your lunchtime. I'm really reaching for it now, okay, I admit. But see, those are the classic arguments in IT for buying new technology, right? Why do I want to put SSDs in my equipment? Because if I can reduce my boot time from 5 minutes to 30 seconds, that's 4.5 minutes that somebody could be doing something else that's productive. 4.5 minutes, right, times X number of times during the course of a day, times 5 days a week, times 30 days a month, et cetera, adds up to $3,000 or something, ridiculous like that. Then you go, well, here's the justification for buying the SSDs. The SSD costs $200. We're saving $3,000. We just gained $2,800 of productivity. And the worker is more satisfied at the same time because they're not waiting. So, okay, so we're on step 1, top of page 58, and we're going to open up the default file now, and now we're going to add that image in to the code. So what the author does at this point is they actually leave the comment in there and just start typing image. You notice how that works, right? It brought up the tag. I'm hitting space. And then what does it do? It brings up another dialog because it knows that with the image tag that there's a special one that we use for declaring our source, right? And notice how I type src to bring up the source attribute. And now I'm pressing enter on that. And notice what else it does. Put it in the double quotes, and I can arrow down. Where is that? Oh, it might be in images. Isn't this cool? That's pretty awesome, folks. And I'm going to close it. Now, this is kind of interesting. I did not type /bracket. I just typed bracket. They put that / in for me. Thank you, Bill Gates. All right, let me show you something else that's really cool. All right, not that I want to undo that, but I'm going to undo that. Actually, just delete it. Okay, so I'm showing you like wow factor stuff. Hey, I want to put an image in my document. Click, drag, drop, boom, done. Talk about saving some time, right? All good high-end HTML editors do this stuff. Is it cheating? You might consider it cheating when you learn how to hand code. Folks, the mindset, as you really want to adopt this mindset, it is making sure that you are not making mistakes and it's speeding up your workflow. There's nothing wrong with doing it. It's not cheating. It is the way of the modern world. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're also going to add an iframe right down here. Now this one, I'm afraid, you will have to type in. And the iframe also asks for a name. And they want us to call it iframe content. And they also want us to add a source. So I'm going to just type that in, press enter. And then once again, it's going to pop up a list. So if you remember what an iframe is from the lecture, an iframe is where we declare a portion of the page where we are going to insert another HTML page into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up, which one does it want us to add? Main content. So I'm just going to arrow down and press enter. And now that I'm done adding elements, I'm going to put in my closing bracket. It automatically puts in the closing iframe tag. Let me ask you a question. Why do we have an opening and a closing iframe tag if all I need to do to pull in an iframe is just add the source? What would I type here? See if you guys spell it right. Okay. From a practical standpoint, you put in a message so that that thing does not load on the screen. You have a message that pops up that tells the user that, hey, you got a bad browser. Do I do that in practice? Waste of time. You know why? Because all the browsers support it since like forever. Okay? But that's why they did it that way. Some people will insist that it's good accessibility or whatever to enable that feature, but that's not a feature that somebody turns off. Every once in a while with JavaScript, though, people do turn JavaScript off because it kind of freaks them out a little bit. And in that case, you might want to have a message that says, enable JavaScript. There's no danger here, right? So just something to think about. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. And we are going to launch the default page. So I'm just hitting the play button. And then you notice what it did. It created an iframe and it pulled in the content from where? It took the main content HTML file and dumped it directly into the iframe. Now here's what's kind of interesting, I think. If you right-click this and do a view page source, does it show you the source for the main content HTML? No, it gives you a link to it. But what if I were to right-click inside the iframe? What about then? Notice how it gives you a different option on the right-click menu? View frame source. So I can actually look at the individual source code for just that frame. All right, hopefully that was at least somewhat enlightening. All right, now I'm down to page 59. And I'm on step number 5. All right, so we are on the default HTML page at this point, and it's wanting us to start adding some links to the page. So we're going to add hyperlinks for human resources that targets the iframe, called the iframe content, and then after that, we're going to add one for expense reports. So really what we're doing conceptually here is we're going to add links to our page so that when we click on them, instead of loading a different page, it's going to grab a different page and put it in the iframe. That's kind of cool. So let's try that. All right. Now, they want us to begin with the human resources one. And then what I'm going to do here is once again, I'm going to demonstrate a couple different techniques for doing this. The first is, well, let's just type it in. Okay, so let's do that. So let's create an anchor tag. There's an A. Then that always gets bundled with an href so we know what file we're going to. And then if we're using the IntelliSense here, we can actually just arrow down, choose human resources. But here's where we're going to throw in something fresh. Because you guys have probably used the target tag before, but usually the only thing you use it for is like self or blank, right? Those are usually the two most common ones. Self is implied. Blank means that we're opening it up in a new tab or new window. Here, we can actually target an iframe on the page by name, and that's why we added the name tag to the iframe content. So what are we going to target? Well, we have to type it in, but it says iframe content, spelled correctly. And then we are also going to give it a name for the link that the users will see. So we're going to say human resources. And then I'm also going to kind of adjust my screen here a little bit so that it all stays on the same line. So everybody good with that approach? You know, I did not. So, that's a good catch because Richard, yeah, they probably did want that to be a capital C. That's kind of their convention, but I already screwed up. So, but I'm pretending like I didn't screw up, and I'm being consistent because I wanted to keep working. All right, we can do the same thing now with the expense reports. And what would happen? I drag and dropped an image in. Can I just like drag and drop this over? Isn't that cool, right? And then what do I have to do? All I have to do is add the target thing. Oops. Which I'm just going to copy paste. And then we're going to change that to some plain text that people would like to read rather than an HTML file. The other thing they want us to do is add a line break below these two entries. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to type BR. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way and see what it does. So it switches it to the XHTML approach. Why? For some reason, Microsoft wants that. Another tip, folks. When you are building applications, technically, HTML5 does not care that you put that closing tag in. But there are some scenarios when you start to add programming code in. So if you were working in .NET and adding C# code, or if you're working with Java and you're throwing Java code in, any back-end language, sometimes you must switch to the XHTML approach in order for it to actually work. And that's not an HTML5 thing, that's an XML thing. That's kind of the interesting thing. So if you ever run into problems and you want to understand why exactly they're doing that, that's the why.
Yeah, I think the primary rule for XML that the text
They absolutely must be closed. So there's not, so even a standalone tag like that normally would not require it, you have to put the closing tag in to abide by XML rules. And again, the reason they do that in this environment is to enable its capability as a full-blown application, because some tools will not work without it. Simple as that. I would say it depends. Because I wouldn't do it unless I knew I was, let's say, working with C# or Java. If I knew that I wasn't, I wouldn't worry about it. There's also a really good chance that it might work anyhow. And if it wouldn't work, that's where your validators come in. So like you run a validation and it might throw a response saying that this isn't really a problem. However, you might want to consider switching it to this because of this and that. So that's a really a good thing. If you want to get in the habit of doing that, I just started breaking the habit of doing that because with XHTML, that's all of what I did on purpose. And then when they got rid of that in HTML5, I was actually kind of relieved, thinking, that it's silly to put that in because we really don't need it. So in this case, if the tool's doing it, I leave it alone. But otherwise, if I was hand coding, I'd probably omit it. I mean, that's just the way I would work. And I'm not saying that's best practice. So I'll let you make your own decision. If you want to get in that habit, do it. But it's a good question. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to go into each one of the individual pages, and that would be expense reports and human resources. And those are both open up here at the top. And they want us to add into it a line break. So I type in my BR. And then they want us to add a link back to the main content page, and I'm going to cheat and just drag and drop. But I'm going to change this to home. And then since I know I'm going to add the same thing to the other page, instead of retyping it all, I'm just going to copy it and come here and add it in. All right, we're just about done, folks. And I'm going to go ahead, and actually I'm not going to hit the view in browser. I'm going to hit the start here because I do want to end up on the home page to begin with. All right, and yes, this does look primitive. I'm not going to tell you that this is a beautiful looking page at this point, but we're learning more about the concepts than anything else. So the idea here is when I click the human resources thing, it brings up that page with a link back to home. And then if I click expense reports, does the same thing with a link back to home. And if you can do all that, you're good. Okay, that's really kind of the point of this exercise. All right. It does make one note in the book at the bottom of page 60, and that is that if you are not seeing these hyperlinks, your browser might be caching the previous version of the page, in which case you want to hit F5 to refresh the browser. Or if you guys are finding that even F5 doesn't actually refresh, hold down your control key and press F5. Holding down control and F5 is actually a hard refresh of the browser. It forces it to reload the page. And there are times, especially when you're working on a local machine, that your stuff's not going to update. I know I changed it. I changed the color from red to blue and it's not showing up. Control F5. Now that's kind of really an interesting thing because all of our modern browsers, that's Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Opera, Safari, all of them have that feature where you can control F5 to force a refresh. One thing that actually was superior, in my opinion, about Internet Explorer, right? God rest its soul. Pretty much at this point, right? Is the fact that you could go into the internet options for that product and go to browsing history settings, and then it would have this little dialog here that would actually allow you to switch from what all the other browsers do, which is automatically determine if they're reloading your page or not. And I want you to think about that really carefully as a designer. Because when you're creating stuff for a browser and you're refreshing that page all the time, after a while the browser says, you know what, you're just loading the same image again. I'm just going to load that same image again. You're just loading the same code again. I'm just going to load the same code again. I'm not going to actually even go to where your source file is or your source server is and pull the information in. It's the same. Here it is, right? But as a designer, when you make a small change and that small change isn't showing up, that's problematic, right? So that's why we're forced to do Control F5. And in some circumstances, you might even find yourself shutting the browser down altogether and then restarting it just to get it to refresh. And I'm sure you guys have probably experienced that when you're working on pages. Maybe, maybe not. If not, I assure you someday you will, right? But what Internet Explorer had that was, I thought, a fantastic feature, I'd love to see this in Chrome and Firefox. And for all I know, maybe they actually already added it at this point. But instead of having it forced to automatic, you could actually tweak it. So you could set it every time I visit the page, reload it from scratch. Don't pull the images up from the cache. Don't pull the code up from the cache. Go to the server or wherever the source is and load the file fresh. So that's one thing I liked about Internet Explorer, that wish list for other browsers, that they grabbed that feature.
So they got something right.
They got something right. Not a whole lot else, but no, I'm kidding. It was a very successful browser. They just wanted to do HTML their own way, and that was a great choice. All right, folks, we have now completed Chapter 2, all the exercises. Yay. So we can put this chapter to rest, and this video will end here. And then I'm going to kick into a fresh video in a couple of minutes to start talking about some of the stuff in Chapter 3.